also want to appreciate you all. You guys are always so positive, especially in those challenging times when you come up in Tallahassee or whether we meet on Zoom. But you guys always brighten my day. And so appreciate that, and keep it up, because it's unfortunately probably going to still be a little bit more challenging. But y'all help keep me going. And I think we all work for each other that way. Just to give you a little bit update then of session, it was definitely a wild one. I know you all are educated voters and you follow along, but our normal 60-day session turned out to be 104 or 105 days. So it went a little bit longer than anticipated. I always think it's interesting a session after an election, because we have new leadership in the Senate and in the House, and the Speaker and the President roles, but all the committees have new chairs. All of us as members have new committees. So there's always kind of a little bit of, kind of scammering around a little bit in the beginning there, and kind of everybody, learning what their new roles and their new committees are. Because of it being kind of new leadership, and then us having 3 special sessions for immigration reform before we started session, everything kind of got delayed priority wise. I would say that is good in many ways, because if you all have been around for a few years, Governor DeSantis's priorities have been usually what is pushed through and is kind of shoved through the legislature. And that was not the case this year, since the governor and the speaker and the president of the Senate were all fighting. So I would say that that is a positive, is that there was a little bit more of member ideas that were happening, and we weren't taking legislation that was copy and pasted from other states that was, more of the governors wanting to run for president. Also, because things were slow, wonderful legislation did not get hearings or did not get pushed through committees, because everything was behind, and so was the drafting department. Very similar to the bill that I worked on with you all. Stefan knows there was multiple times going back and forth with edits, and even though exact language would be sent to the drafting department, it would still take a while before that was inputted and before we got back an updated draft. So that happened with your all's legislation, but it also happened with legislation across the board. So as I said, not as many bills passed this year. There are, some good and some bads to that. The budget took forever. That was the reason that we did not finish in the 60 days. And that was more fighting between the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President. We were fighting not just about how to spend money, but ways that they wanted to save Floridians money. The governor wanted to do property tax relief. The Speaker of the House wanted to do a reduction in the sales tax. And then the Senate President had a rural renaissance package with investment in rural communities, because he's kind of, he's more of an agriculture background. None of those did pass, but I would say it is very scary, because those things are going to be coming up again. And although in some ways it might sound good to have, relief in what we're spending, as you all know, if we're bringing in less income, that means services are cut. Property taxes are what our local governments, the ones that are closest to you and know what you need best, that's what keeps them operating. So I do want to keep that in people's minds, because that subject will be up again. And many folks that I talk to, will say that sounds like a great idea. But then when we start talking about, you want to be able to have your police and your fire and your schools, property taxes pay for all of that. So we have to keep that in mind. If it was to pass the legislature, it would go to the ballot. So it would be something that, obviously we would all be talking about, with our friends to educate them on that. The budget did pass, though, with about 115 billion. The governor vetoed, I think, almost 600 million. Unfortunately, a lot of that was for local projects. For my district, we were still able to bring home over $10 million. But we did have about $3 million cut, and those were a lot of the nonprofits that needed for. We had a homeless veterans program, we had an addiction recovery program, we had a student program where students would learn to read English and Spanish at the same time, another program for junior achievement, and a mobile diaper bank. So all, unfortunately, the nonprofits that are hurting the most right now, a lot of those projects did get vetoed by the governor. We can all say different reasons why we think that it happened. Could be location, could be sponsors. I heard stories of DEI where lobbyists were telling nonprofits, go to your website, change some language on it. You can change it back in a few weeks, but they don't want to see anything like that. And if they will veto the item. So That was probably the most damage that was done of the session, besides HB 1205, which I'm sure everyone on this call is very aware of, because that is the petition bill for the constitutional amendments. That was my least favorite bill of the season, besides some pro-growth ones that we did our best to fight. And obviously there's some court cases about that, but that's the one that would affect you all the most and make things more challenging, that the people's voice cannot be heard, between making it harder to get the petitions to qualify, but also making the threshold higher for something to pass on the ballot, putting more scares and tactics on the people who are filling out the petitions, because they will have to fill out their driver's license number or their social security. If they sign a petition more than twice knowingly, it becomes a felony. So that is probably the legislation that would affect you all the most, I'm sure, and hope that you all have a couple lawyers that are on your team that can help with this, because obviously this legislation is designed to stop situations like this, when the legislature is a failure with what you all as constituents asked for. So you all go to the amendment process. And so then unfortunately now these guys want to change that so that you all cannot have your way through a constitutional amendment. I'm hopeful that that will do well in the courts. We worked in the Senate and in the House with ACLU and some of our partners to make sure that we got specific questions on the record and specific stuff for debate to kind of help them with their court case. They're also do a good job of telling us things not to say and not to ask, because sometimes that opens unknowing doors. So I do want to say that during these challenging times that we have a lot of great partners that are out there helping us, even though we might have slow numbers and smaller groups, and especially in the Senate where there was only 10 of us at the end of session. Our partners are very helpful at times like that to provide us data and provide us backup. So we're able to be organized. You might have seen, if you were following along, the Senate lost their Democratic leader about a week before session ended. I will say that ended up working out for our benefit as being organized as a team the last week. We have our new leader Lori Berman. That's when we saw the constitutional amendment bill, and we saw a lot of others. So I would have to say us as a Democratic caucus, we were more organized that last week in session, but it was definitely challenging times with all the shifts and the changes. Besides the stuff that I told you a little bit about the wins and the vibe for it, I do want to say it's definitely unsettling, the tone and where we're going on helping our fellow neighbors and who those neighbors may be. So I definitely think it's going to be more challenging times ahead. Alligator Alcatraz opened up after the session. So I look forward to more conversations on that. You all have probably been following on the news, and that's $450 million that probably us as a state will end up having to foot the bill, because it doesn't sound like our president is going to step up for this. But that is another, we just said that the governor vetoed, I think, $570 million. There's $450 million for Alcatraz that could have almost balanced out those vetoes. I do also want to thank you all for coming up to Tallahassee. You guys came along there close to the end to give me some smiles and uplift me. We had some great conversations then, and then also post-session moving forward, and maybe, continuing those relationships and maybe having some of those more difficult conversations with some of the Republicans to see, maybe there's pieces of the legislation that they could be supportive, or, have more of those conversations about the insulin copay. But I mean, we know this is more messaging that they're not going to be as is, but I do think it's important to still have those conversations about dental, mental health, and see, where we have compromise or where we have opportunity. I think, unfortunately, when we say certain things, people have a reaction, or things are branded that way. So sometimes maybe when they hear the term Medicare for all, they might just automatically close their minds. But I think that there's definitely opportunities to have conversations about little pieces, that there are incremental wins that we can have moving forward. And I would definitely recommend everybody, if possible, come up this year earlier or try to get with us earlier. I know it was harder after the election just because everything moved fast, but our committees weeks will start, I think I'm not looking at my calendar, but October 1st or October 7th is our first committee weeks. So that's a good time to be kind of checking in with everybody, because they're putting back on their legislator hats. Hopefully a lot of folks are spending some time with their family and kind of recouping after session. And so a lot of folks now kind of on July are a little bit of a break, but I definitely think it's better to have those conversations sooner rather than later. And I know you guys have me on your agenda for a really long time, but I really don't want to ramble. So I'd love to open it up for questions. If y'all have any questions on your legislation, things that happen session, things that are going on now. If you ask me about the federal government, I will do my best to answer, but it's challenging to follow them and to keep up to date with what's going on in my backyard too.